Hello, I'm Mark Doff, Curator of History for Gilcrease Museum. Thank you for joining us this evening for our program, Reflections on Being in the Studio with Shan Goshorn. And a very special thank you to the three ladies you see on your screen, Lorraine Davis, Rose McCracken, and Robin Green Tilley, all of whom will be more fully introduced in just a moment. For our program this evening, I have two primary objectives. The first is to let you know that phase 2 of our exhibition, Weaving History into Art, the enduring legacy of Shan Goshorn, is now open. This iteration of Weaving History into Art has 24 new Goshorn baskets for you to see and experience. If you visited the museum between early October last fall and January 3rd this year, I encourage you to visit again and see these wonderful new additions to the exhibition. And if you've not yet visited, I hope tonight's program will inspire you to do so between tomorrow and March 28th when the exhibition closes. My second objective tonight is to share with you several of what I consider the truly monumental Goshorn baskets presented in phase 2 of Weaving History into Art. To help me, I've invited Lorraine, Robin, and Rose, who were with Shan in her Tulsa studio where these baskets were created, to share their memories of Shan. I'm hopeful that by the end of our time together this evening, you'll have a much greater appreciation for Shan as an artist and person, as well as the collaborative creative processes that resulted in the baskets that we'll share with you this evening. Also, if you have any questions, I encourage you to ask them by using the Q&A icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We'll try to answer as many of the questions as possible at the conclusion of our program tonight. Now, to help me introduce the other people you see on your screens is Robin Green Tilley. For those of you who perhaps already have our Goshorn exhibition catalog, you know Robin through her wonderful essay, Believe. And with that, Robin, I'll turn to you to more fully introduce yourself, as well as our other guests, Lorraine Davis and Rose McCracken.
Thank you. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about Shan. When you asked me to talk about how we met, I wanted to share what I wrote for the essay in the catalog, because really I don't know how else I can more clearly tell you about how we met. So from the moment we met, I leaned in with total abandonment and rapt attention. Working at an advertising agency, I interviewed Shan for a job as a graphic artist. Hiring her to became a doorway to our friendship, which lasted 37 years. From the beginning, Shan explained that her deep conviction of the power of art to change the world, her mission to be a vessel to tell native truth. She described a photography show that she was developing using Indian images in advertising. So she was sporting a purple eggplant hair with bangs that stood up in plume-like feathers. She was radical punk for the 80s in conservative Oklahoma. Fearless in her expression, I wanted to be close to that kind of courage, her well-developed sense of self, her unyielding knowledge, and that her life had a driving mission. Shan believed, and I believed her too. Her message echoed like a crow's cry into the future, up my spine and straight into my heart. I knew from the moment that we met that our friendship was already written, and I was in the witness of the rise of greatness. But I wasn't alone. There were so many people there, most especially the two beautiful women that are here, Lorraine Davis and Rose McCracken. They were both Shan's assistants. I met Lorraine and Rose when they were in their 20s. They're friends of my daughter's. So when Shan's hands became really full and she had the opportunity, basket orders and basket ideas were just bursting out of her. We were brainstorming how she could resolve the problem. And Lorraine and Rose were the perfect answers. First, Lorraine. So I can't wait to hear about the things that Lorraine can tell us as she joined Shan in the Smithsonian in Washington. So Lorraine, would you tell us a little bit about your experience as Shan's first assistant?
Sure. Good evening. My name is Lorraine Davis. I started working for Shan in 2012. I had just moved back to Oklahoma with my husband and my young son, Nash. And Nash just started a kind of like a Mother's Day out, and I was looking for something to get out of the house. And I asked Robin if she knew of a easy, part-time, simple job, and she introduced me to Shan. However, that job became so much more than I could have imagined, and it did not remain easy, simple, or a part-time job for very long. I started off running errands for Shan, shipping art, answering inquiries, and accompanying her to Indian market. Well, when that became, when her art became the need and the want and the desire for her art became accelerated, so did my work for Shan. That's when I actually started working with Shan. I started doing research with her, started collaborating with ideas, titles, shapes of the baskets, and just the ideas behind them. But most importantly, my role, I became Shan's splint cutter. And that seems very small in some aspects, but it was such a daunting task at first. I remember making my first cut and my hands were shaking. I had Shan's watchful eye over me. But after the first sheet, it came easily. And I initially cut at a Kinko's store on 11th Street, and I would spend hours and hours at that Kinko's, sometimes with my son in tow, and that became unrealistic. So we had to purchase our own rotary cutter, and I brought that home and started working from home in my kitchen, and that became my workplace. But that also allowed me to spend more time in the studio with the administration aspect. From there, the flexibility allowed me to be at home with my children, give Shan the hours that she needed. And then I became pregnant in 2014, and that flexibility was a necessity, but it also made Shan and I realize that we were in over our heads and we needed more help. And that's when we brought Rose in, and she was perfect. She knew us both. She knew the work. She was bringing so much experience with her. And she was the perfect fit for me because I don't like to say it, but I will. She did all the stuff that I disliked. She did the photography, the Photoshop, and so much more. It was just such a natural fit. And now I'd like to introduce Rose. Rose, introduce yourself.
Thank you, Lorraine. Thanks, Robin. Yes, so I came on in 2014, and I think from there, it was a great group right off the bat. I mean, we referred to ourselves as the shared brain after that, and we had a great time. I mean, initially I did also just start running errands and taking care of the things that just Lorraine and Shan didn't have time to do. And then Shan did teach me how to use Photoshop and taught me how to do some of those putting together of images that she needed. So it became more collaborative at that point, and it came at a perfect time for me in my life. It ended up being a place, not necessarily a job, but going to the studio was kind of a place of refuge for me, and that's exactly what I needed at that time. To be with friends and to be doing something incredible with an incredible person. So.
Well, thank you, Lorraine, Rose, and Robin for getting us started. We're going to move now to the baskets. And the first basket that I want to discuss is this one, Preparing for the Fall. And I think, Lorraine, this is when you joined Shan there in the studio in 2012. The image that you see on this basket is of a Cherokee woman in the mountains of North Carolina, the ancestral homelands of the Cherokee people. For this basket, Shan used her own double exposed, hand-tinted photograph. What makes this basket so special, besides its size, it's again monumental in my mind, and the wonderful story that goes with it, is that it is a double weave. And I'm often asked by museum guests in the exhibition about the double weave process. So Lorraine, I'm going to go back to you. Can you describe the double weave process that Shan used?
Sure, it is very similar to what traditional Cherokee use with it starts, the double weave starts on the interior at the base, and then it is woven upward to the desired height, which you can see here. And then once you get to the rim, the splints are turned, where they're turned toward the outside. Well, with Shan's basket, she would flip it. She flipped it upside down where the rim would be resting on the bottom now. And she wove toward the bottom, which is at the top. So the wonderful thing, or so many wonderful things about this, is that Shan was weaving this basket upside down. The image was actually upside down. I realize that this picture is taken with it right side up, but for the most part, she would weave upside down on this. And then once it got back to the bottom part, the seams are woven within itself and tucked in to create that seamless, non-beginning, non-ending basket, where it makes it very difficult to see where it started and where it ended. But yes, as you said, keeping the photograph's integrity on that slant while weaving upside down is just always, my mind was always blown with Shan's weaving of this.
Well, and that's something that, whether it's a single weave or double weave like this, is the math involved, the registration to keep the image. And many of these baskets have images or text on the inside as well as the exterior. So she's having to keep the registration both on the interior, exterior. It's really amazing. And so you can see in this photograph on your screen, the interior is what's kind of there in the background, and now Shan is working down to finish the exterior. So the double weave. And when Shan did her first double weave in 2010, it's a basket that we have in the Gilcrease collection, she was told by the Eastern Band of Cherokee that she was only the 14th person that had mastered the double weave. And she taught herself how to do it. I mean, that's incredible. Well, before we discuss our next basket, I do want to share a personal Shan experience I had this past fall while my wife Lisa and I were in the Smoky Mountains, which is the same setting as Shan used in this basket preparing for the fall. Lisa and I were at the top of Klingman's Dome there in the Smokies and saw the sign that you see on your screens. And what caught my eye was the image of the woman. And I thought to myself, because I'd been so immersed in this exhibition, that sure looks like one of the images on two of Shan's baskets that will be in the second phase of the Goshorn exhibition, Weaving History into Art. And sure enough, as I read through the text, I saw the image on the sign was indeed by Shan. And she did a number of images for the National Park Service that you see throughout the Smoky Mountains. And I know it's hard to see, but right here at where my cursor is, illustration by Cherokee artist Shan Goshorn. So one of the real treasures for me throughout this exhibition is finding these very unexpected connections. I didn't know to expect that there in the Smokies. Well, the next basket that we want to share with you this evening is Unexpected Gift. And it's one of my many favorites in the exhibition, in phase 2 of the exhibition. In contrast to Shan's baskets, her mini baskets that dealt with the trauma of cultural genocide that was a result of the Indian boarding school experience, Unexpected Gift reveals what was for Shan an unexpected positive contribution of the boarding schools, the many lifelong friendships, and in some cases, marriages that resulted from the bringing together of these young people into schools. Rose, could you share your memories of Shan working on this basket?
Sure. I think this basket's a great representation of what Shan brought to a piece. She brought personal elements. There are personal stories involved in this basket, her grandmother's story, her mother's story. She brought research. I know that she did tons of research, and I think Lorraine, weren't you with her when she found the photo that's on the front of this basket at the Smithsonian?
I'm not sure if it was that one or not, but it is a possibility of that.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
she basically, she would do the research. She would have this idea. She would think it over, and do the research. And then if you could go back to the screen where with the drawings, she would start, once she had the concept finished in her head, she would put all of her notes into a drawing, and notes, and start putting it specifically down on paper. And from there, once that was done, we knew what we needed to do as far as how to print the sheets. I think a lot of people don't know this, that we've heard some people think maybe she paints the images onto the baskets after they're woven, but that's not the case. She would have her images laid out and printed on very large sheets of paper. And then Lorraine would cut the splints, and she would weave them back together just as she had imagined. And honestly, I don't think Lorraine or I ever really figured that magic out, how that actually happened. But she was a very detail-oriented artist. So I just wanted to point out, for instance, on this image right here, how this image with the handwriting and the hands and the photo are laid out. It's done very specifically to very specific measurements that Shan knew how it was supposed to be, and she had drawn it out. And all of those words had to be lined up just so, within 1/4 of an inch, because every splint is 1/4 of an inch. Showing the personal element that the name of her grandmother is woven into this basket because she was at Carlisle. And so just so much going into one piece. And so this is a good example of that.
Yeah, I mean, this Rose, I agree with this one. The names were on the inside, and then on the outside was the photo that you see, and every single detail. So the lines had to match up on the back and the front, because even when printing, because whenever you cut the splint, I mean, we had to make sure, like even someone's handwriting, and when you're copying it, and the photo had to line up accurately with the text, because as I'm cutting splints, I have to be very careful, because there's many photos, or many of the baskets, it shows people with their faces. And it's crucial. Those eyes and those heads are crucial. You want to retain that image, and just even how the handprints are framing that photo, all of that. I mean, just even going back to her drawings, she thought all of this out beforehand. So it was, yeah, all of her baskets were very, very thought out.
Well, I want to jump in real quick. I learned something literally every day about Shan and her basketry. And I think it was Rose that shared that Shan Shan did not typically have the name of a basket at the time she started. And you can see that here in this image of her notes. It's just at this point, boarding school basket. It doesn't have a name. And Rose, Lorraine, share how you arrived at name, how Shan's process for coming up with a name.
Sure. She would, all Shan's baskets would be lined up. You can see it in, I think the photo that we started off in the beginning, they're all behind her. And we would have sticky notes, not on the baskets, but just in front of the baskets. And we would sit with the basket for a while. We knew what the splint said. We kind of had an idea of what the theme of the basket was. And we would come up with titles, and as we would be walking and spending time in the studio, you'd write down, oh, what do you think about this? Or you just write it in case not all three of us were here. And throughout the naming of it, we'd scratch them out or add to it. And some of those, I wish we would have kept some of those sticky notes with her notes, so we could have seen like, oh yeah. But there was the other great thing about that is maybe that title wasn't used for that particular basket, but it would be used for another basket down the way. So, yeah.
And she
Yeah,
would
thank you.
crowdsource for her
Yes.
titles too.
Yes, too. Yeah.
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 Well, thank you. Next is this truly monumental basket. If you look at the size, it's 15 by 15 by almost 20 inches tall. The title, The Fire Within. And with this basket, Shan deals with the historical trauma experienced by the Cherokee people caused by their removal from their ancestral homelands and the boarding school experience. But The Fire Within also comments on the importance of the continuity of Cherokee culture through the generations. This is something, the continuity of culture was very important to Shan. Lorraine, you shared with me last week a kind of smart aleck comment or remark that you made to Shan regarding what would become the complex design of this basket. Could you share that comment as well as Shan's inspiration and creation of The Fire Within?
Absolutely. Yes, this basket might speak to mine and or our relationship the most. I had the honor to accompany Shan when she traveled to for her 213 Smithsonian Artist Fellowship, Research Fellowship. And it was there that I learned what the 7-sided star represented for Shan and others. There is a beautiful room at the NMI Research Cultural Center where families can come, and there is a star embedded in the floor with a fire. And it's a very sacred space. And as Shan was explaining to me what the star and what the room meant to her and to others, that moment became overwhelmingly heavy to me, as it should be. And being a little sassy, I had to cut the heaviness. And so I kind of remarked, I go, Shan, forget the bird basket that everyone's telling you to make. See if you can make a star basket. And we both chuckled on it, and I did it just to be sassy. But then it stuck, and that was in 2013. And as those of you that are familiar with Shan's baskets, they carry such a heavy message that I think that's also what Rose and I brought to the relationship. Is it allowed us to like help her carry that burden, even though her shoulders were definitely strong enough to carry it herself. But and I did. I joked about a lot of things and was sassy. I would tease her once I really could see, like, oh yeah, you're right, that basket isn't straight, or just stuff like that. It was fun and it was friendly, even though we were dealing with such heavy topics. The other is that this one, it shows how long a basket will take from the fruition of the idea of, like, that was done in 2013. It's when we, joked about this, and then she finished it in 2016. So that's a 3-year process. But the other part that I love about this basket is the fact that it brings Rose into the story as well, is because the fire that is shown in the photography here was a fire that they built on Rose's property one evening. And it was a night that they all shared together. But it was, if I remember correctly, Rose, didn't you all build that fire specifically for the basket to get the photographs that evening? So
yeah, we did. She had the full vision by then. She knew exactly what she wanted the basket to look like. So we scheduled it. She and Tom came out and they had dinner, and we built a fire, and she even knew exactly how she wanted that fire to look to, to the detail. And
right.
She took photos of it from all directions and got the image that she wanted. And we pieced it together as you see on the sheet. I think in this particular, this fire image is actually in a number of her other baskets as well. But for this particular basket, you only see little bleed throughs of the fire around the edges there. But the image is there under the words. And this is about when she started moving more into sculptural pieces. I think this might be she did a prototype of the star before she made this piece, but I don't think that she did. This might have been her first kind of sculptural piece that wasn't just a basket shape.
Yeah, the burden basket, I mean, it was already a traditional style basket. So but it's still the size of that, and coming up with how to do the larger burden basket. It still had a little bit of the sculptural that Rose is speaking of, but I agree. I think this is one that really led her to it not just being a basket, a traditional style basket.
And I think it gave her the confidence to move into some of her other works that were difficult and kind of astonishing, really.
Well, before we leave this image, it reminds me of a couple things. First, you're right, this fire image was used on Eternal, which was in the first rotation, one of the last baskets that Shan completed. We get a chance to see the sheets. Lorraine, you mentioned earlier the large sheets and that you would cut them. Well, here's a sheet before it's been cut. So folks in our audience can get an idea. Rose or Lorraine, approximately how large is that sheet that we see on the screen?
Ooh,
Something by 26. I don't have the exact measurements, but I know. It's a couple feet.
I know, I'm like, this big? No,
This
I don't know.
Okay, sorry to put you on the spot. Well, and the other comment,
paper, you know that.
Yeah.
well, and you can see the text on the sheet below the sheet with the fire. There'll be, each line of text will become a splint. So that gives you an idea.
Right.
And then the other comment I wanted to make, Rose, you've gone through the fact that a basket may take 3 years from the conception to its completion. Shan shared with me once, and then Tom has shared it as well, that 90% of Shan's work on a basket was the inspiration, the kind of visualization of what it was going to become, and then all of the research she did. I've said many times that I can't separate the artist from the advocate from the scholar. And 90% of the work was really all of that. Once she had that in her mind, the final 10% was the weaving, because she knew where she was going with it. So
That's right. By the time she ever started weaving, she knew exactly what that basket was going to look like. And if it didn't look like that, she would undo it and start over.
Well, thank you. Up next is this 2-basket set, Why We Dance. Interestingly, the title for this set of baskets was the result of a question that Shan asked on social media. The question was, why do Indian people dance? Lorraine, Rose, share with us some of your recollections of Shan's inspiration for and creation of this set of baskets.
Well, I can definitely say that this is one that like you said, Shan was such a collaborator. Like, she felt that she said it herself many times, that there are other people helping her along with all her baskets. With this one, she reached out and asked everyone why we dance. But this also symbolizes where I was saying earlier, it's like, they have such heavy meanings, but Shan was so wonderful about seeing the light and the positive aspect of what her baskets could bring to people. And the photo is actually one that Shan had since, I believe, the 80s. And Rose, you explained it so much better than I could, of the printing process and then the hand tinting.
Well, she took photos at powwows, and I know these date at least to the 80s and beyond, and so she knew that she had these photos, and she thought about it. She molded over, and she was wondering, how she would put these photos into the baskets. And what you see here are actually not the photos themselves, but reproductions of the photos on paper. So, you know, a copy. And then she went over that and painted. Now, this is a great example of, you know, actually, she's known for her baskets, but she was also a photographer and a painter. She didn't actually start weaving until around 2009, 2010.
2008.
Was it 2008?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, you know, she has a great body of work before she ever started weaving. And this is, she was known for hand tinting some of her photographs. And this is a great example of that.
For me, that's a very vivid memory, both going to the powwows in the 80s with
Is
her
it?
in a camera, standing next to her, being a forever helping, and having everything that she had to do without Photoshop. That's what we have to remember. I mean, she used so many different skills before the machinery was available.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and a couple comments I'll add. Shan makes this point in the video that we have in the exhibition, the little theater space, that she did not become active in Native rights issues until she moved to Oklahoma and started attending these powwows. And so it begins to all come together. She had developed a body of work through her photography before she came to Oklahoma. She was skilled as a painter, as a drawing artist, but it's getting involved in the Native scene here and really becoming active in it led to her advocacy. And then eventually all of that comes together in her basketry, her photography, her painting, her advocacy. And as I've said earlier, you just can't separate the artist from the advocate. It's just so woven together, pun intended, in her work. Mm-hmm. Well, you've seen this work before. We spent a lot of time with it in the first, our virtual opening back in October. This is Squaw. It was the last basket that Shan completed before her passing in December of 2018. And so the three of you, Robin, Rose, Lorraine, this being Shan's final work, I can only imagine that it may have also been the most difficult and challenging for her as a result of the trials and tribulations that she was going through dealing with cancer.
Yeah, I can say we all knew that Shan was bound and determined to make this basket and to finish it. And we were all bound and determined to do whatever we needed to help her finish it. This was like a all hands on deck brainstorming from anybody and everybody, all her good friends. And I think we knew the basket needed a sturdy form. Like we threw out styrofoam. I even contacted someone that did 3D printing to try to come up with something that she could weave the basket around. And then we finally decided to do the plaster cast, and it took 2 models, multiple casts, and then still, I can't remember whether she had 1 cast and then wove the basket, and that basket is the one that didn't do so well, that we realized it needed the armature, the metal piecing for her to weave or to have that piece and then take the cast apart and then weave around it, because it was very important with all of Shan's baskets that you can see the inside as well as the outside, because the inside tells a story too. And she just wasn't having it because we even suggested, I think, Rose, at one time, of just not even having the opening of the neck. And she goes, no, you're going to see what's in there, because the inside is just as important. This basket is impressive and monumental, but it's not my favorite because I knew it would be her last. And I don't know. I think we all knew she was holding on to finish this basket. So.
I have a personal funny story about that. In a text exchange while she's weaving that basket, we texted each other, called all the time, and I was complaining about something, I'm sure, a terrible day I'd had. And she texted me a picture of herself weaving that basket, and she said, you think you're having a bad day? Try weaving this form. And I was like, hey, you win on that one. Just amazing, because giving the message of women's place in the world, this embodied everything I think that she hoped to do, which was astonish people enough to look at this soft, beautiful form and say, I didn't know that about violence statistics, so that we learn. And that was always such a driving force for her. And this basket did it in a way nothing had been done like this before, ever.
Well, and that's a great point, Robin. Shan's work, whether it's this basket or so many of her others, are about increasing awareness. So it's about education and making people aware of these issues, whether it's the issue of mascotting using native imagery as mascots, and just think about what's happened since Shan's passing. The Washington football team has decided they're no longer going to be what they had been called for 80 some years. And here locally, the Union School District has decided not to use that image any longer. And that's something I know that Shan was adamant about and protested here in the Tulsa area for 30 years.
Loma gave a speech, I'll never forget, her son. She stood up so locally, nationally, and I think how often she must be smiling with all of these changes that are coming through. I just think, how she would love this, right?
Yeah, I agree. And to this work specifically, Squaw, I didn't realize it at the time I was conceptualizing the exhibition, but it did become an exhibition presenting Native women artists featuring Shan, but also the other four that are that legacy that is noted in the title. And then I look at the screen and I'm the only guy here. I see Rose and Robin and Lorraine. This really did become an exhibition about and for women in so many ways. So thank you again for guiding me down that path. Well, I want to move to a little bit, it's connected to Squaw and Shan's passing, and it's this work here that's really a departure from the monumental baskets that we've been discussing. These are much smaller, and you'll see the baskets here in just a moment. They're much smaller in physical size, but I think for you, Lorraine and Rose, they're every bit as meaningful as the baskets we've been discussing. So with that, share with us what we see here in this photograph.
Sure. You know, throughout the years, we did so much with Shan, and but we never wove with her. And Rose stated this was Shan's gift to us, and it was really nice to like just put everything aside and just learn this craft from her. Even though we'd been around it for years, we never sat down and did this. I never felt like had we come to her and said, hey, Shan, I want to learn how to weave, she would have done it. We just never, I don't know why we didn't, but it took her being diagnosed with cancer for us to finally all sit down and do this. I don't know, this really meant a lot because she was a mentor to so many artists, and she was my mentor too, but she was my mentor in a different way, not in the art realm. Like, she was a mentor of how I witnessed how she was in her relationships, her friendships, how she was a mother, and how she was a wife. Like, she was just a wonderful example of that womanhood that you were speaking of. And I grew so much from working with Shan. She taught me to have a voice. It might be shaky and nervous sometimes, but I can at least, I speak up, and being told no is not the end of the world. And it's not something to be scared about, because I know Shan was told no many times. And then she was told yes, because it's Shan, and she won't take no. So yeah, it was a beautiful moment.
Yeah, Lorraine, I have to agree 100%. What I learned from Shan was more about life and how to be in life, her sense of calm and what to be bothered about and what not to be bothered about, because she had a great grasp of what was important, I think. And so those years being with her, I kind of got to sit back and start asking myself things about what's important in life. And so those types of things are what I remember about Shan, and this these learning baskets. We basically took a few weeks. She was her idea. She said, I'm gonna teach you how to weave. We're gonna all sit down and weave these baskets together. And so every time that we'd come into the studio for those few weeks or however long it took, we just immediately sat down and started weaving. And she would teach us that math and the math that I couldn't ever get. I really never, I was the one that she kept having to tell to, okay, no, undo that and redo it, It's just, but then she was so patient. She never had that thing where she was annoyed by that, or why aren't you getting this? She just, was able to just say, nope, do it again.
Yeah. It circles back to what Rose said, that Shan was the one that called us that we had one brain. And it was, I did my share, Rose did her share, and Shan's job was to weave. And that's what we needed her to do. We needed her to tell her stories, to share and we were there to support her.
I think it's important just to note that the reason we came on board is so that she could get as much art out into the world as possible. I mean, she, we talk about that she taught you to cut the splints, and she taught me how to Photoshop, but she was doing all of that before we ever came along. This was so that her vision could get out there, and she did end up weaving over 250 baskets, which I just think is amazing. So
it is amazing, and a shameless plug for our exhibition. We've, over the course of the exhibition, have exhibited 60 of those 250 baskets that she completed in her lifetime. Probably the largest, well, I think, Rose, you confirmed for me, the largest exhibition of her work ever. And because of the difficulty of bringing them together, it may be the largest exhibition of her work that ever will be. Just a comment before we move on. These 3 baskets are in the exhibition. They're in the gallery that has the other miniatures. We have 10 other miniature baskets that Shan did. And I'm like a proud parent, but that gallery is one of my favorite. Those miniatures, they're as powerful as the big monumental works in their own way. So
Absolutely. We always remarked on how cute the miniatures were, but then when you started reading the statements behind them, they came at you with a punch. So they were small but mighty.
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
I did see that before we do believe, I saw that someone asked about the splints, and I can address that real quick. Shan would actually glue to create longer splints for the larger, more the larger baskets. So with traditional basket weaving, you usually have the reed it's long, and you can, but with the paper, she would have to glue the splints together.
And there was another question, if we want to answer real quick. Somebody's asking, what was the text that's on the inside of Squaw?
The inside, I believe, was the statistics, and I think there are also the names. That was something else that Shan sourced out and asked. That was very moving. Yeah.
Yeah, names of murdered and missing Indigenous women and what tribe they belong to. So it's very.
Right. And for those in the audience that aren't familiar with Squaw, it deals with the extraordinarily high rate of violence, particularly sexual violence, directed at Native women. And there is a movement, the Missing Murdered Indigenous Women's Movement, that is bringing awareness. Well, Shan was very much involved in that, again, bringing awareness, and to make the such powerful statement and impact that this basket does. Shan included the names of these women. I mean, really personalizes it down to the names of these people that have gone missing or have been murdered. Well, our final basket tonight is Believe. And of all of the 60 baskets in the Goshorn exhibition, Weaving History into Art, I think this is probably my favorite. If you ask me tomorrow, it might be a different basket, but I think tonight it's my favorite. And that's due at least in part because I'm looking at Robin and thinking about the wonderful essay by the same title that she contributed to our exhibition catalog. So with that, Robin, I'm going to turn it back over to you to share some of your memories of Shan and the creation of Believe.
I think I'm going to thank you, Mark. I think I want to take this opportunity again to just read a paragraph. I'm just going to even hold up one of the catalogs. This is so much more than a catalog, really. It's a teaching tool. And in fact, I know that some of the local schools are starting to do that. So I'm kind of passionate about her mission continuing and that teaching to continue. The Believe basket. Shan fought to stay on earth after her diagnosis. She painted a basket filled with uplifting statements that had been submitted from around the world by her Facebook support group, and she named the basket Believe. Shan believed in her lasting spirit and the power of the ancestors. The beauty of that group remains in the Believe basket. Those messages lifted her up, and in the time left, as we've been talking about, her fingers flew, producing a collection of baskets. She did not waste a moment. She believed fully in using her life. Her hands were not idle. They were in movement toward beauty or efficiency all the time. She had long, beautiful fingers. We miss her, and we are so moved to still have these pieces of her here. And I know as her friend for almost 4 decades that I love having this opportunity to talk about the amazing thing that she accomplished with her life. And of all of these baskets, nothing that she accomplished more than showing us how to live. And she did that a lot through her dying process. She was very brave in that process. And that's what this basket's about. We sat and talked a lot during the time that she was putting this together as she was sketching the image. We talked about the power of positive thought. She was very determined to do all that she could to stay as healthy as she could because she wanted to be there for Tom and her children and her grandchildren and her friends, most of all. Even though weaving was so important to her, when it really came down to it, the most important thing, of course, was family. And messages like this, because part of what was really inspiring about the Believe group is that I watched her really take it in. You know, it's really easy when you get a compliment to say no, but she took in the love. And even though it astonished her, and she would say, there's just so many people supporting me, but she used that energy and she used it for something beautiful that we get to sit here today and talk about. So it's terribly hard to walk in the world without her. I don't even know that I know how to do that yet. But I do know that I want very much for her vital messages to continue to be presented. And I think that's part of why the catalog is so important too, with these kinds of writings.
Well, thank you, Robin. You just provided me the perfect segue to mention something that I'm particularly proud of, and that is our Goshorn exhibition catalog. If you're not aware, we do have a full color exhibition catalog. It has all of the objects, not only Shan's objects, but the objects of the other 4 women artists featured in the exhibition. It has 13 wonderful essays. Robin is one of those 13. It concludes with Joy Harjo's poem, First Morning, that she first recited at the service that we had here at Gilcrease Museum for Shan. And some of you may already know this. A few of you have taken advantage of it, but I want to make this offer again tonight for all of you in the audience. You're our museum members, and it's a special offer that if you purchase a catalog, you can receive a free private tour of the Goshorn exhibition with me. I would love to take you and up to 5 of your guests through the exhibition. So how do you take advantage of this wonderful opportunity? Well, you can call the museum store and say, hey, I want to take advantage of Mark's offer he made last night. You can go to the website, you can order it using this discount code that you see here. I would love to spend the next 6 weeks, that's how much longer the exhibition will be up, spending time with you, our members, in the exhibition. I have so much enjoyment when I'm doing that. It beats the heck out of Zoom meetings. So I'd rather, and we're totally safe. We have our mask on. So I encourage you to take advantage of that. With that, in the time remaining, I want to open it up to questions. I see a couple that I'll answer. One is, which institution will have the largest repository of Shan's works? And I'm going to guess, and Lorraine and Rose correct me, I think it's the Smithsonian. They bought her last really major set of baskets, Resisting the Mission. There were 14 baskets in that set. And the Smithsonian also has Shan's archives. So,
Right. Well, they don't have all of the archives yet, but they will.
they will.
Yeah.
Once you get up in the attic there at the house,
Once
pick
we
them
sort,
out.
yeah.
And I have to say, because I'm very proud of this too, that they came for the first load of archives, which she was a meticulous journal keeper. I think that we all could see that. But they came for the first archives before she was diagnosed. So it was really because she was an amazing artist, and she was the first living Native American artist that they had ever done that for. So.
I did see there was a question that someone asked about squad being monochrome. That was not reflective of where she was personally. It did do, the red is part of the missing and murdered Indigenous women. The red is one of the colors that a lot of the artists used for that particular statement. No, personally, Shan was so much more colorful, like the Believe basket. Those are Shan's colors in that Believe basket. So that had more to do with the significance of what that basket pertained to. And I think we did cover, but just in case, we can say the splints were a 1/4 inch. That had nothing to do with a traditional. It just was easier for the weaving process. They were large enough to have the text printed on it, and where you could still, everything could be, you could read it clearly, and she could still weave with it. Her first basket that she did was peace treaties, and those were almost 1 inch to 1.5 inches. And she was so funny about that basket. She wanted to throw it in the trash, but it's so significant because it's her first basket. But yeah, it was kind of flopped over, and she said she was embarrassed about it, but I think it's beautiful of where she started and where she ended up.
Thank you.
I was just going to say one thing though, that she did actually experiment with some smaller splints on a few baskets, the 1/8 of 1 inch splints, and that was, it was very difficult. So you'll see a couple of those in the miniature, but it was just very difficult to weave with the smaller or the thinner splints.
Thank you. And I made a promise to Susan Neal, our executive director, and Frank Mulhern, our senior director of development, who's responsible for tonight's program, that I would have us off the air by 7 o'clock so that you folks can enjoy the rest of your evening. So that's our program. Again, I want to send a very special thank you to Robin, Lorraine, and Rose. I can't tell you how much I appreciate the 3 of you sharing your memories tonight with us, but also all you've done to help make Weaving History into Art the very successful exhibition that it is. And again, thanks to all of you for joining us. Stay warm and safe. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
It's wonderful being here.
Thank you so much.